It is 7:30 now, and as usual, we'll be broadcasting on Zoom and, of course, on Periscope. So excuse me if I'm looking to and from, and I'll be answering questions when I can. Hello, my name is Austin Byrne-Jones. I'm the presenter at The Body Curious, and this is part 4 of Health All About Fat, your BFF, your best friend forever. So, if you remember from the last 3 sessions we've gone on about cholesterol and the different types of fats, both saturated and unsaturated. And this week I'm going to be pointing out the benefits of things like butter. Now, butter is quite unique in the sense that it is not only your best friend, but it has particular things that other fats don't have. So, butter is your friend. Yes, it is indeed. This lovely yellow stuff, hopefully you're organically produced with very happy cows. What is interesting about butter? It is it is a medium chain fatty acid. Now, that means it's also a combination of both saturated and unsaturated fats. But it's also very clever in the sense that it acts very similar to a carbohydrate, in the sense that it actually sort of bypasses the natural process of digestion that the liver would normally have to do, and in essence turns directly into energy. So it contains about 12 to 15% of these short and medium chain fatty acids. Okay, it doesn't need to be emulsified by those bile salts. Normally speaking, fats, what happens is, as I've explained before, is that it combines with the cholesterol to then sort of break down and with the bile that then gets evacuated through our poo. However, in this particular case, it gets absorbed directly by the small intestines, directly to the liver, and then it gets converted through that glycogen process through the liver directly into energy. Now, what's amazing about butter is it also has antimicrobial, anti-tumor and immune-supporting properties, especially that stuff called lauric acid, which we find also in coconut oil. If you remember last week, I said that if you've actually got healthy piggies, and also a lot depends on what the animals consume, reflects directly on the fat that they produce. Hence why we've got a fairly good idea of whether the animals you eat have actually had a decent lifestyle. Is actually reflects in the nutritional value of the fat. And so, for example, pigs that are fed on coconuts in the tropics, they will have a very high content of lauric acid, which features within coconut oil. And what's fascinating again about butter is that medium chain fatty acids do not appear in any other types of animal fats. So butter really is great stuff. So why do I bang on about lauric acid? Well, lauric acid also features in the mammary glands of animals, hence why from dairy products it's great. And also, as I've already mentioned, it also comes from coconut oil. Butyric acid, hence why we call it butter butyric acid. It's also unique, or practically unique to butter, and it also has antifungal properties as well as I've mentioned before, anti-tumor effects. Are we all happy with that so far? Yeah. A couple of people joining late on there. Okay, so hello, welcome. So we've got these omega-6 and omega-3 essential fatty acids. Okay, and these occur in butter in small but also very nearly equal amounts, which is great. This is what we want. And this is this perfect balance between linolenic and linoleic acid, which is omega-6 and omega-3 essential fatty acids. They also prevent various different kinds of problems associated with the overconsumption of just simply omega-6 on its own. Omega-3 and omega-6 work together. As I mentioned before, omega-3 is only really held by the system if it's in the presence of a saturated fat. We tend to only think of omega-3 as being somehow related to fish, but actually it's present in all types of animals, assuming they're not stressed. Omega-3 vanishes as soon as we get stressed. So butter also protects against that hardening of arteries, which everybody bangs on about with regards to heart disease. It also protects against cataracts and also calcification of the pineal gland, which is in your brain. Now, what's interesting about when we're looking at the dairy and whether it's actually any good for us, we found that if you fed calves on pasteurized milk, in other words, something that's already been heat treated, or in fact on skimmed milk, they actually develop joint stiffness and also they don't thrive. This also points out why things like where we all bang on about raw milk or raw dairy products, there's manifest advantages in the fact that it changes, it becomes a totally different thing as soon as we introduce heat to it, and it loses a lot of its beneficial properties. A lot of people are always worried about the bacteria, but actually those companies now produce raw milk. They have such advanced ways of keeping everything clean and healthy. It's probably a lot healthier for us than the way in which pasteurized milk is produced. So, and what's interesting with regards to the pasteurized milk, if you actually then add back in the natural butter fats, then calves will then thrive again. So it's actually the fat that is required to help us be healthy. Something else called the Wurzeln factor, which we'll be mentioning slightly later on, is that this is present in cows that are fed on grass and natural products, whereas as soon as we pasteurize that, it actually removes that particular thing, and it's only present in raw butter, cream, and whole milk. With me so far? Again, this is again quite detail heavy. As I've said before in the previous three, I always try and make my lectures as fun as possible, but when it comes to fat and cholesterol, it's a very serious subject, and to get around our sort of the many years of prejudice against fat and cholesterol, I'm sort of struggling uphill, so I have to validate what I'm talking about based on research and facts, and this can be a little bit detail heavy, but there's not really an easy and fun way around this. It is actually a very serious subject when it comes to health, and I've been talking about this for the last 7 years, and the tide is finally turning. But it is a very serious subject as far as I'm concerned. The insanity of the media and actually the medical mainstream that has this thing against fat and cholesterol doesn't make any sense from any point of view. So where are the details on this? Well, Medical Research Council surveyed and they showed that men eating butter ran half the risk of developing heart disease as those using, say, something like margarine, which I've said before is a fake fat, and those are the bad guys. Saturated fat is good for you. Unsaturated fat is good for you in equal amounts. The bad guys are the fake fats. I come back to my own little thing, and I always say, you know, as a rule of thumb, if it would have looked like food to Ugg the caveman, the chances are it still is. If it would not have looked like food to Ugg the caveman, the chances are it's not, because biochemically we haven't really changed much. So a survey of South Carolina adults found that there was no correlation of blood cholesterol levels with bad dietary habits, such as the use of red meat, eating animal fats, fried foods, butter, eggs, whole milk, bacon, sausage, and cheese. This is something that keeps cropping up over and over again of research projects. That all this stuff about, you know, saturated fat is bad for us, or eating greasy food is bad for us. Well, I'm sorry, but the research has never actually correlated this at all. It doesn't make any sense. Year on year, since the 60s, saying the same thing over and over again. No, there isn't any evidence to support this kind of idea. So in terms of disease trends involving butter consumption, what is interesting is from the introduction of margarines, or those fake fats, margarines, trans fats, hydrogenated fats, shortenings, there was a move to stop people consuming quite as much butter. And what's interesting is in the 1920s, and this is from the States, this is that the average person was consuming about 20 pounds of butter per year. And the cases of coronary heart disease and cancer was very low. And yet, as what is interesting is as butter consumption drops, there is sort of a direct correlation of both coronary heart disease and cancers increase. Now, this is, again, I often warn people about context. It's always worth going back to the research on this. a table can show you lots of things. And I use this, and I think this is an interesting correlation, but it doesn't make it 100% accurate, in the sense that we have different means of measuring things like heart disease and cancer. However, I do find it's an interesting correlation, is because we now know that yes, the trans fats and those hydrogenated fats really damage our health, and quite far more likely to be the contributing factors to heart disease and various different kinds of cancers, particularly bowel cancer as an example. But it's an interesting thing, but don't take it as being the whole story, because there are other factors in terms of how we detect and measure different rates over the years. But however, from 1920s all the way up to the 1990s, cases of cancer and heart disease have gone up while butter consumption has gone down. So here are a few little bits here. Pretty much I've just already mentioned this. From 1910 to 1970, saturated animal fat in the American diet declined from 83% to 62%, and butter consumption plummeted from 18 pounds per person per annum to 4 pounds per person per annum. And from 1930 to 2010, dietary cholesterol intake has increased by only 1%. Now, during the same period, the percentage of unsaturated fats and trans fats, such as margarine, vegetable oils, has increased by about 400%, and the consumption of sugar and processed food has increased by about 60%. So what's also interesting about within butter is you have particular types of vitamins which are fat soluble. Remember, right in the lecture 1, I was talking about different toxins, you have different toxins, and your body gets rid of them in different ways. And if you have, say, a fat-soluble toxin, the body deals with that by, if you consume water, it washes out because they are water-soluble. But you also have fat-soluble toxins, and the way to get rid of those is through fat-soluble, the consumption of fat. What's also interesting, you have fat-soluble vitamins. In other words, you have to have the presence of fat for them to be able to be absorbed and be contained within the fat. And these fat-soluble vitamins include vitamin A, otherwise known as retinol, vitamin D, that's stuff for bones, remember, vitamin K and vitamin E, as well as all the other natural occurring cofactors. Now, these all have various aspects to do with bone health and immunological health. And what's interesting about butter, it is also one of the best sources of all those nutrients. And what's also interesting is about the particular form of vitamin A that is contained within butter is also the most easily absorbed and utilized than other sources of that particular type of vitamin A. So again, butter is your friend. So if we then move on to unsaturated fats. So you have unsaturated fats. A lot of people talk about the benefits of, say, things like flaxseed oil, and that contains a very, very, very tiny proportion of saturated fatty acids, only 9%. The rest is, you've got 18% is oleic acid. That's stuff that we find in larger proportions in olive oil. We've got 16% is omega-6, 57% is omega-3. And because it's got such a high omega-3 content, flaxseed oil is reckoned to be the remedy to when you have an omega-6, omega-3 imbalance. However, because I've mentioned before, unsaturated fats are very bendy, they go rancid very easily, so flaxseed oil and omega-3 oil, anything that's very high in omega-3 oil, because it's so delicate, must always be kept refrigerated, and it should be never heated. Okay, so you start to basically destroy the beneficial properties of it, and if anything, it actually becomes a health hazard to a certain degree if you start heating omega-3 oils. Any questions so far? Okay, all very quiet tonight. You see, it must be all that sunshine you've had in sunny Devon. Now, what's interesting, everybody bangs on about fish oil. Oh yes, fish oil, omega-3, everything else. Well, new studies have actually shown that fish oil by itself actually doesn't have any effect on arteriosclerosis at all. Again, as I've said before, omega-3 actually doesn't really it can't really be held by the body unless it's in the presence of saturated fat. And of course, fish oils are unsaturated fats. And also, contrary to popular opinion, fish oil has little, if any, influence on either the cholesterol content in the blood or the formation of free radicals. Hello there, whoever just joined. So, and what's also interesting is the excess of polyunsaturated fats replace saturated fatty acids. Fish oil, you've just missed this little bit. If you just come in there, you're saying fish oil is good. As I've just mentioned, if I just go back one slide there, if new studies have shown that fish oil has no effect on arteriosclerosis, as in heart disease, and also it has little, if any, influence on either cholesterol content in the blood or the formation of free radicals. Doesn't mean to say it's bad for you, but actually it has very little in terms of its benefit with regards to health. So we've got an excess of polyunsaturated fats, and they actually replace the saturated fatty acids in the cell membrane, and that becomes a problem because, as I've mentioned before, saturated fat is actually the thing that we need to keep our cells fit and healthy. If we start to have too many polyunsaturated fats, the cells end up sort of taking it because the only fats that are available. That also makes the cell membrane weak. Okay, and that also means you actually have more cholesterol that's released into the tissues to give them stability. Flax oil. As I mentioned before, we were just saying that flax oil is really good because it's a great source of omega-3. So when we look at, say, just something as simple as obesity, we're always knocking people who are saying, oh, like people who are fat. Okay, this is nonsense. Is that just because someone is technically obese does not actually increase their risk factors for heart disease at all. And actually, it doesn't actually make any difference whether they've got high or low omega-3 fats either. So just because you're a particular size does not automatically mean you are unhealthy or have a higher risk of heart disease. As I said before, you can be fat and healthy. You can also be fat and unhealthy. You can be thin and healthy. You can also be thin and unhealthy. Your size, or what we call morphology, has very little relevance. Quite often you can look at someone, you can look at a beautiful, large lady and she'll look healthy and beautiful. You can also look at someone who may be exactly the same size and weight, but they actually don't look healthy. A lot of it is just look at the quality of the skin. There are so many cultures where big and fat is beautiful, and quite rightly too. But regardless of what your size, you can be equally unhealthy or healthy. Your size has very little relevance in terms of your health. So this is where coenzyme Q10 comes into it. Now, if you remember before, coenzyme Q10 is basically your body's spark plugs for your heart, but also you have, hang on, let me backtrack, I've just thrown my own self. So when we have an imbalance of omega-6, it turns into arachidonic acid, which then produces various different types of enzymes, all of which promote inflammation in the arterial walls. However, when we go back to, say, statins, one of the key side effects, by their own research, they'll confirm this as well, is that one of the things it impedes is something called coenzyme Q10. Now, coenzyme Q10, as I've just, if I'm backtracking slightly, coenzyme Q10 is, in essence, your heart spark plugs. It is the thing that keeps things moving. The thing with statins is that, yes, they lower cholesterol, if that is the thing you want to happen, but it does impede the production of coenzyme Q10. So even if the research, what the medical establishment tells you is correct in the sense that low cholesterol is the thing you want, and that it reduces your chance by X% of having heart disease, by their own admission, statins also increase your chances of heart attack because of the impediment of the production of coenzyme Q10. So if you're desperate to take statins, ask your doctor, of course, and they will confirm the same thing, is to take coenzyme Q10 as well. Okay, cheerio, Prince Hussein there. So, welcome. We've got people coming and going today. So, eating high levels of meats and animal fat from grain fat and animals saturates the body with large amounts of arachidonic acid, which again is this thing that increases inflammation. So, this is where we've got this balancing act. Is on the one hand, I'm saying, yes, animal fats are really good for us. However, Those animals that have got good animal husbandry, in other words, you're feeding them on a natural grass-fed diet, you actually have high levels of omega-3 and this Wulzen factor, and it actually produces a good quality fat, which is really good for us. However, if we stress our animals out and we also give them a grain-fattened diet, in other words, carbohydrates, does exactly the same to us, it actually interferes with the types of fats, and that actually ends up becoming high levels of arachidonic acid, which then increase inflammation in the arteries. And what's interesting is you actually get those animals that are on an organic, free-range meats and wild game actually have much lower levels of this arachidonic acid. Yet another reason of why good quality animal husbandry is key. And for those of you on Zoom, I've got this rather marvellous set of little pictures there in terms of, is actually a lot of these problems to do with heart disease to do with the food chain? And I would argue, yes, it is that it's not only the quantity of things we consume, but it's actually the quality of the food. And this is not simply a case of, oh, yes, it should be organic and everything else. I believe it is the case. But if you eat rubbish, then don't be surprised you'll start to get ill. And this applies to the very animals we eat. If you eat animals, then you have to be very aware of what it is you're eating and what they have been eating, because it goes through the food chain. It can't possibly be anything else. I personally like a nice burger. I like meats of all kinds. However, I can also see the value of when vegetarians talk about some of the types of treatment and food that are given to mass-produced animals really is cruel and unusual. I want to be last question. Totally agree. However, I would argue that our own sedentary lifestyle is a larger contribution. Absolutely. Being sedentary quite literally means we are not taking part in what's called the metabolic demand. In other words, if we have X number of calories, the only way we can actually help ourselves is to actually burn those calories off. If we can't be expected to eat supposedly a super healthy diet, but if the intake is huge, but we're actually still not moving, then yes, we are still going to get fat and unhealthy. There's that fantastic lady on Facebook at the moment, the lady who is a big lady, and yet she does yoga and is super mobile because she's not sedentary, and yet she's a big lady. And this is what I'm talking about, being fat and healthy. So now, the Wulzen factor, I mentioned this earlier. So the Wulzen factor is often called the anti-stiffness factor, and this is a compound that is present only in raw animal fats. Okay, now the researcher, Rosalind Wulzen, which is named after, discovered that this substance protects humans and animals from calcification of the joints and degenerative arthritis. Now, we've also got something called Activator X. Okay, sorry, this is a little bit detail heavy, but this is really useful to note of what you feed your animals and how it goes through the food chain makes a huge difference in terms of how it then directly affects us. So we've also got something called Activator X, and this was discovered by someone called Dr. Price. And they found that this stuff was a powerful catalyst which helps the body absorb and utilize minerals, which is found in obviously things like salts, Himalayan pink salt, good quality vegetables, that kind of thing. Okay, it's also found in offal from grazing animals and some seafood. Now that's interesting, is because in the Western world these days we tend to almost shy away from a lot of the offal meats. We consume far less kidneys and livers and those kinds of things, and actually they contain an awful lot of the real serious B vitamins and beneficial factors. We've gone a bit squeamish about, so that our meat should somehow have no fat on it and we shouldn't be eating this, that and the other. Whereas actually, if we are going to respect the death of that animal, to me we should be eating the whole thing if we can. So what's interesting is that butter, we'll come back to butter again, yeah, so it can actually be an especially rich source of Activator X when it comes from cows that have been fed on proper grass. But it disappears if the cows have been fed on, say, cottonseed meal or high-protein soy-based feeds and grains and such like. The good news about this, though, is that Activator X is not destroyed by the pasteurization process, unlike the Wulzen factor is. So that is the little section we've got with regards to the fats. Hang on, I'm being asked another question. What would you recommend to active athletic people in hierarchy of importance? In terms of when we talk, if we're talking about, say, Olympic athletes, that kind of high-level sports, then we're looking at there's this balancing act of you need the nutritional value which fats and proteins have. But obviously, when we're training, there is this importance with regards to carbohydrates, which is quite often given lots of weight to. I'd often argue, and there are certain sports people that do this, they replace quite a lot of their carbohydrates with butter, because butter acts very similar to a carbohydrate. In other words, it bypasses that digestion process, as I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, and then it is absorbed by the small intestine to start with and gets converted into energy very, very quickly, almost as quickly, in fact, as carbohydrates do. So as an option, even though carbohydrates have a very high energy value, they have a very low nutritional value, whereas the advantage of fats is, and in particular butter, is that you've got a very high nutritional value as well as a very high energy value. I hope that answers your question there. Yes? Okay, so I think for today, because the next section is all about how the nature of being stressed or not stressed interferes with how your body deals with the various different fats in your system. I've already mentioned that in cows, and in fact lots of other animals, your B vitamins and your omega-3s drop as soon as you start to get stressed. We've covered this section on fats. Obviously, the other 3 lectures as well cover that, all the research to do with cholesterol and fat as well. And the next section of this is how do we then apply that, and how does that then affect us if we start to become stressed. So part 5, which will actually be in 2 weeks' time, I'm away on holiday on next week. So in 2 weeks' time, we will be talking about stress. So it'll be all about fat, but part 5 will be about stress. So until then, cheerio. This is Austin Burne-Jones from The Body Curious. I hope you enjoyed it. Cheerio.